So if you can just pick up, you were watching the show.
I was watching the show, and the way it had been constructed and the way we shot it was that this was a group of men who got up very, very early in the morning and went out in the frozen tundra, and they worked on a wall, building a wall, the whole day on into night, and they came back and there was nothing for them to eat and so on, and they freezing, and with one of their members, an old man, dying there, the lights then went out and they went back to sleep. That was the frame of the picture. We started with them. Now I'm watching at home, and we start the same way, and then just before the end comes, where they're back in their thing, it cuts off, and it's onto a Bob Hope commercial with a bunch of girls splashing in the pool. And I said, well, it can't be over, because we have to have that scene of them now back in their same place with the lights going out, going to sleep. It wasn't, it was over. And so coitus interruptus, you know, was just terrifying for me that we you know, had somebody do that to us in a certain way. But that's what happens.
Was that the only instance where you delivered a show and they did something with it later?
Oh no, that happens. That happens at certain points. I know in Raisin in the Sun, I wanted it's a different juxtaposition of scenes at a certain point, and scenes in there. Studs Terkel, by the way, did a scene we shot it, and it's on the cutting room floor, and it's a tragedy that it is, because it's a wonderful scene, and it opened the thing up from that just being in their apartment all the time, a set, you know. So, oh yeah, it happens all the time.
And there's another debate that is still going on today, which is the director getting a director's cut versus the studio or network having final say.
Right.
What's your feelings on that?
Well, it's all negotiable. In my own case, what I try to do is to stay with the picture as long as I possibly can, which means sometimes that I have to give up a little bit of money, because your deal is usually constructed on when you get a certain amount of money on signing the contract, you get a certain amount of money on the first day of principal photography, and then weekly for the duration of the show. Then when the show is finished shooting, they wait until you deliver the director's cut, and you get a certain figure at that point. And then when the picture eventually is totally finished, you get another amount. So I'll have people from the office call me and say, have you finished your director's cut, because we owe you a check when you do? And I said, no, I haven't finished. So it cost me money, or at least postpones my money, in order to keep in there. And what I do with a producer, and that's no secret, is I say to him, look, I want to show you the picture. It's not my cut, because of the fact that I want to take out some scenes that you were there. It took all night to shoot. It was raining, it was cold, and so forth. And you hate to cut that scene because it was so tough getting, but it's slowing us up. I want to cut it and so forth, but I want you to see the whole thing first, and then I'll do those things, and I'll get your notes as well. So the producer and I then work together as a team, and we eventually bring it, not just he or I doing it, but the two of us working together to bring it to the studio.
Well, in regards to theatrical films, and certainly with cable movies, which we'll get to the ones that you've done, it's also the debate part of goes back to art versus commerce. And do you agree that sometimes the directors who have a director's cut can be too close to the material and have deliver a longer project than the studio or network would prefer. So there's always that battle, it seems.
Yes.
How do you maintain your objectivity when you're in post-production to find the pace and the final running time of the film?
I will admit to no diminishment in my objectivity, and but I'm sure, of course, it is possibly there. But on the other hand, you check with certain people. You have a little screening for a bunch of people, and sometimes they will make comments, and sometimes the comments are right on, and sometimes the comments are not right on, but they lead you to some kind of thing of they said something, but that's not what they meant. And so you sure, I would imagine that after a while we see, I know, for example, in the last one I just done, for about the first 5 runnings of that show, there's a scene which is absolutely hilarious. It's very, very funny. But after 5 runnings of it, I stopped laughing. I'm analyzing then, why is it funny? But I'm not finding it funny. And then we screen it, and people start laughing all around, and you say, what are they laughing for? You've forgotten even that it was supposed to be this funny movie or scene.
And is that Black Iris?
Yeah.
Okay, we can touch on that later. Let's go, if we could, to your first television movie, which you mentioned earlier, which is the official first television movie that you did.
Right.
What was the name of that, and who was in that?
Silent Night, Lonely Night, with Lloyd Bridges and Shirley Jones. And it was a delightful experience, one of the nicest experiences of my life.
Why was that?
They are both terrific people. They both care. They both, Bud, as he was called, Lloyd Bridges, is a worrywart, but but nonetheless he's a darling worrywart. In one case with him, he was nattering in my ear for quite a long time, and I was, I was on the clock. How long do I have to listen to this before I go ahead with what I wanted to do anyway? And but I was respectful. He's a wonderful actor and a wonderful man, so I listened, even though I felt that it was just nattering and nervousness on his part. He didn't want to get in there and act. He wanted rather to talk on the sidelines. And some people came onto the set, and I said, who are these people? This is a closed set. Please, get out of here. We don't want you here. Thank you very much. Go. Well, the people all reacted, and they all went outside. And I said, yes, Bud, what were you saying? And he said, no, nothing. So I realized that a technique for working with him was to have a little temper aimed at somebody else, and that would shut him up. So anyway, what was the question? The question was, what was it like working with them on that first?
And the experience of doing that.
Yeah, just wonderful. Shirley, I worked with Bud several times since, but I never had the opportunity to work with Shirley again, and it bugs me.
Well, you still have time.
What's that?
Maybe your next
Still
film.
have time.
There we go. Yeah. You also, during the 1970s, continued to come back to episodic television, and you did a bunch of shows. You did Ironside.
Oh dear, yes.
Oh dear. Any memories?
With Raymond, yeah. Well, there was a situation where we were on the set one day, and one of the young acolytes of his, who was not supposed to be in until around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, according to the schedule that we had for the day. This was now around noon, and he shows up on the set.
Who's he?
I'm not going to tell you.
Oh.
So I go over to him, and I say, you know, your call is not... He said, I don't mind. He said, I just like to hang around, and so forth. I said, oh, well, that's very nice. Great. So we go on with the day, and now it's 4 o'clock, and we're ready for this guy. And so he comes over, and I say, if you just come in the room and come up to the top of the desk here, and then we'll go from there. And so he came in the room, and he came up to the top of the desk, and he said, and now here I say something stupid about I wasn't able to get the information and so on. I said, well, excuse me, what did he said, yeah. He said, that's what I do every show. He said, I just, I come in, I say something stupid, and he says something stupider, and so Raymond then says, will you get on with it and say the words that you're supposed to? And he was smoking a cigarette. He said, oh, I seem to have dropped my cigarette. I got nervous when my star started to take exception to my words. And I said, come on, fellas, what's the real going on here? He said, well, this is stupid that I say this. I said, well, what if you say this? Okay. Well, Raymond says, now my cue is no longer my cue. And so I said, well, what if you say this? Anyway, I wrote a little new page thing because I knew it wasn't really about the material, and gave them to them, and they seemed satisfied. So afterwards we shot the scene, and we're on to another scene, and my assistant director is with me, and I said, you know, that guy came in at 12. He was sitting here all the time reading the paper and reading magazines and stuff. He could have come up to me and said, listen, I'm not happy with the scene that we're doing. But instead, he creates a damn scene. I get more, and I work myself up. So I go over to the young man, and I said, you know what? If I had it in me, I would take you right outside and give you a real thrashing. Now he starts getting up, and as he keeps going up, he's a 6'4", and I said, but I've decided I won't do that. And he was absolutely furious. I said, how dare you do something like that? That's very unprofessional. Don't do it again. Really will crack your wrist. So anyway, he didn't talk to me for about 4 days, and then he came and he apologized and so forth. But that's my main memory of Ironside.
Is it really? Is it always a balancing act to deal with actors,
yeah,
especially when an ensemble cast?
Yes, yeah. Sometimes there's difficulty. Sometimes there isn't, of course. But they all have different agenda, and.
But also the processes. They also have different ways that they're taking on the role, right?
Yeah. Sure. How
do you, as a director, distinguish if it's their personality or their ego versus that's the way they're getting into their role?
There's always, difficulties in understanding just where one or the other is coming from. But if you have been there and in that sort of position before, you recognize what what the dynamic is and how you can help steer them through rough waters. Actors don't like being difficult. They like being good. They like being perceived as being good, and so on. So I think if you keep that positive message going out that you approve. That maybe it could be better, but still you approve. And that's the main message that a director has to convey.
Terrific. Another show you did is Macmillan and Wife, which is a very popular show at the time.
Oh, yeah.
Any memories from that show?
Yes. I thought Rock Hudson was a great guy. I liked him a lot. And I learned a principle that I pass on to young film students, and that is, and it grew out of a situation on that show. I had been sought after by the management for that show to do one, and by that time I was, a little bit more exalted station. I was doing MOWs and features, and they asked me would I do one or two Macmillan and Wife, and I agreed, but I really had to be wooed, and so after the end of the first day, on the second day, the dailies were shown of the previous day's work at noon on our lunch break. So Rock came to the dailies, and I came, and several other people were in there, and the lights went up, and he walked out. I thought, gee, that's ungracious of him. Why doesn't he say, hey, looks great. I mean, Dan, you're wonderful. You're a terrific guy, a good director. But no, he just walked out like that. So I was pretty put out. Next day, same thing. He gets up, he walks out. Third day, walks out. By this time, I'm furious with him. I just say, an ungrateful wretch, And that afternoon, he comes over, he puts his arm around my shoulder. He said, listen, I've got an idea. What do you think if I do this and this and this? And as he's speaking, the light bulb's going on over my head. I said, I've got him. He trusts me. He's now asking my advice and so on. So it was all unimportant that he praised me for something. And the principle is, directors don't get attaboys, they give them. In other words, I shouldn't be looking for praise for someone. I'm the one who does that. I give out the praise. I'm the one who's in the control of the situation, which I have to manipulate with. So that's my main memory of that show. Was it a eureka moment for you? It was, to some extent. It was, yeah.
Wow, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
And so you obviously were happy with the episode.
Oh yeah, yeah, very much.
Did you do one or two?
I did a couple, and I liked them. Particularly I liked working with him. I really respected him a lot. Susie was great too. She's a lovely young woman. And Roddy McDowell was in the cast of one of them, and you can't say anything bad about Roddy McDowell. He's a wonderful man. Leonard
Stern was the exec producer.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you have much dealings with him?
Oh yeah, he was very definitely. He was a showrunner, to use a more modern phrase. We didn't know that back then, but that's what he was.
Right. Another show that you did during that time is Marcus Welby, M.D.
Mm-hmm.
With Robert Young. How was that experience?
Oh, it was great. That was a good show. Very, very, very fine producer, David Victor, and the principals, Jimmy Rowland, as well as Robert Young. Very, very good to work with. Good subject matter. It was the first year, and I suppose they really had gotten the top material. After a while, it became disease of the week thing, but I had long since not done Marcus Welby's. So, but there was really good show, and I liked working with all the people.
Another popular show is Medical Center.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts or memories from that?
Some was almost a mirror image of Marcus Welby in terms of, but not in terms of the star, who was a very difficult person to work with, and I tried everything I could, but it was I was never happy with the situation, and but otherwise, the producers, co-stars, and people like that were good to work with.
And now these shows were filmed at this point?
Mm-hmm.
35 millimeter film?
Oh, sure.
Uh-huh. And how, if you were to accept an episode of one of these types of shows during this time, would someone preface you on the show or the stars, in this case, star being difficult?
Mm-hmm.
Would you know going in what to expect, or did you arrive?
For the most part, you did. Yeah, you knew that there was, but you always flattered yourself and that you can handle it, and that how bad can he be?
Let's go on to an award-winning movie that you did by the name of Sybil, which you talked briefly about, but I want to talk further about Sybil.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about how did that project come about for you?
Well, first of all, I was not hired to direct Sybil originally. There was another director involved, but a great old friend of mine, Jacqueline Babin, was the producer, and she was primarily from the East Coast. She had worked for David Susskind at the same time that I worked with, and so I knew her very well. And since I was now a longtime resident here, and she came out, she would call me all the time and ask me, what about a cameraman? She said, I'm looking for a cameraman for this show I'm doing, Sybil. Unfortunately, Danny, she says, they have already made their choice as to director. I said, fine, no problem. I hadn't heard particularly of Sybil at all. So I gave her the name of a cameraman, and she contacted him and used him. And right down the line, almost every category, sound guy, sound mixer, I'm trying to remember some of the others, but there were a number. I know not the production designer, that had been settled before me, her coming to me for advice. About 3 days into shooting, I got a call from one of the executives above Jackie, and said that they were replacing the director, and would I read it. And so I was in Big Bear at the time on a little holiday, and so they sent a messenger 3 hours up to Big Bear with the script, and I read it and thought it was magnificent, just a great screenplay by Stuart Stern. And I said to them when I called, I said, who's playing the mother? That was my first question, because that was a crucial role. And they told me who it was, and I thought, if I had been casting it, I wouldn't have cast her, because I had had a very bad experience with this actress before. And but I said, she's perfect. She's absolutely perfect. And then I found out it was Joanne and Sally Field.
Joanne
Woodward and Sally Field. Yeah. And so I flew into New York, and when I got there, I had tried to read the book, but it didn't read the same. It was not the same kind of sensibility at all. It was a different. Stewart's was a wonderful screenplay, so I put the book aside, and I told Jackie and Babin and Stuart Stern, the writer, when I got in there, I said, I'm not going to read the book because it's only confusing me. I'll stick to the script, and if there's any things that you see that I'm going off in a crazy direction, just tap me on the shoulder and take me aside. They never did. So it was a real, they were there all the time. Their presence was very important. It's the first night that I got there, they had been shooting during the day, just pass-bys, car pass-bys, and indeed Sally running up the stairs and somebody else running up the stairs and things like that. But now they were doing a little scene, and I was just standing there like a person in the crowd looking at the movie being shot. And well, I could see that she was doing something that was sort of halfway, not really committed to the moment. And so the assistant director who was there was very conscious of me being right next to the camera. He kind of looked at me and I said, come here to him. And I told him that I thought that Sally ought to commit to going very much into the other character and then snap right out of it. But we should see that she is totally another person in this synapse of time. And he went over to her, and I could see Sally Field, brow curling up and sort of thing. I said, oh man, I've done it. I have done it. So I walked over and I tapped him on the shoulder and I said, let me explain it myself. And I told her. And she said, oh, okay. So they, places please, action. She did it and going in, and the guy looks at me and I said, yeah, that's great. So he said, print it. And she came out and she's going by me. She says, I don't know who you are, but I love you. It was a good beginning of a relationship.
Yeah. And obviously you introduced each other. And
oh, yeah.
Did you have a chance to rehearse much with this, or it was just...
I didn't get no rehearsal. None whatsoever.
Then beyond the writers being so close to set, how did you handle the subtleties? I mean, this is a very serious subject matter and had a lot of layers there. What did you do as a director to alleviate some of that?
Well, it was fantastic material to work with. So it was there. It was all in the text and in the texture of the text. It was a magical screenplay. Stewart, of course, won the Emmy for his writing in that. He was a man who took, they expected about 2 months, and it took about 18 months for him to do the screenplay. And that's how painstaking he was. So, you know, it's fantastic material. It doesn't take too much to involve you on a visceral level.
And we'll change tapes.